Hello everybody and welcome to our channel Vaidya's Chess Hub for the revision of level 3. So all the students of level 3 should totally watch this video. This will help you get ready for your test, the clearance test for level 3. Now how to use this video? Well, watch this video. If you don't have the time to watch it all at once, well, you can break it into various parts and episodes. You can pause the video if you want to try to find out some solution yourself. Also, you can pause the video if you want to write down the answer. I also suggest that you can have your board set up simultaneously as you watch the video if that is possible. All in all, this will definitely prove you very fruitful in helping you prepare for your level 3 clearance test. So let's get started. Now, the first thing that we are going to study now is the openings. Are all the openings that you have for your level 3. So I think the first one we are going to study is white opening with e4 and black playing e5. Then white plays knight to f3, black defends it with knight c6, and now you have d4. So this is the Scotch game. Everybody should remember that if this bishop were to come on this b5 square would be the Spanish game, which we've studied at level 2, which is very common even at the grandmaster level. And if this bishop comes to c4 square, then it becomes the Italian game. But at the moment we're studying the Scotch game, so this is what the Scotch game is. Okay, so let's go through the move order one more time. White plays e4, black plays e5. White plays knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn. Black defends it with knight to c6, and white breaks the center. You remember breaking the center? Yeah, d4. That's what white plays. So this is the Scotch game. Let's go on to the next one. For the next opening, you have white playing e4 and black playing c5. So this is definitely the Sicilian defense. It's when white plays e4 and black responds c5. So black is saying that I'm not happy with the draw, I want something more. This is very fighting. Now white plays d4, breaking the center if you would call that. C takes d4, and white can recapture with the queen but instead plays c3. So this is known as the Smith-Morra gambit. And now black took that pawn on c3, which means this is the Smith-Morra gambit accepted, and knight takes c3. So this is how it looks. Let's do it one more time. White plays e4, black plays c5. This makes it the Sicilian defense. Then d4 by white, c takes d4, and now white doesn't recapture the pawn, instead offers c3. And then black, if he takes it, becomes the Smith-Morra gambit accepted. There are also lines where black will refuse that and just push the pawn to make the bishop come on d3 and gaining on tempo before the bishop moves to either c4 or b5, wherever it might be required. So d takes c3, knight takes c3. So white has sacrificed a pawn. That's why this is called a gambit, and black has accepted it. So Smith-Morra accepted, Smith-Morra gambit. Okay, let's move on to the next. Now for the next, we will study with the black side. It's when white plays d4, black plays knight to f6. Whenever white player plays d4, in my opinion, there are two really strong replies. One is what we've just seen, knight to f6, and the other one is simply pushing the pawn to d5. These are two top moves that you will get at the grandmaster level. So here, knight f6. White continues with c4, and black plays g6. So if this were something like a Nimzo-Indian defense, over here you would have the pawn moving to e6, then white would play knight c3, and the bishop pinning the knight, bishop b4. That would be the Nimzo-Indian. Again, something that I think we've studied at level 2. So again, very strong at grandmaster level as well. Here black plays g6, then knight to c3, then d6. So this is the King's Indian defense. Okay, then e4 by white, bishop fianchettoed, bishop g7, and knight f3, knight bd7. Remember knight bd7 because both the knights can come on this d7 square. So it's important to write this as knight bd7. So knight bd7, bishop d3, and castle by black, castle by white as well, and finally c6. That is pretty much the main line for this particular opening. Let's go through the move order one more time. White plays d4, black responds knight f6, c4 by white, black plays g6, then knight c3, d6, e4, bishop g7, knight f3, knight bd7, bishop d3, castling by black, castling by white, and black plays c6. Got to study that. Okay, let's go on to the next. For the next one, we have to study from the black perspective again. White playing e4 and black plays g6. This is known as the modern defense. You will see this a lot nowadays at various levels. E4 and g6, something refreshing, something new. Yeah. So if black is not playing for the center directly, then white will be happy to place a pawn on d4. Bishop g7 should immediately be played because that's the idea of playing g6 and get bishop g7 in. Knight f3, d6, bishop c4, knight f6, knight c3, castling by black and castling by white. This is the main line of the modern defense. Let's go through the move order again. White plays e4, black plays g6, white plays d4, bishop g7, knight f3, d6, bishop c4, white's ready to castle, knight f6, knight c3, black castles, and white castles as well. Okay, now we are done with the opening section. Now it's time to move on to some positions. So let's start with some mating patterns that you have to study in your level 3 notes. And I think the first one that we have is this very classic position in what is called as the Morphy's checkmate. Take a look at this position and you will immediately find out that this bishop and the rook, they make a solid team and they both have lined up beautifully. They are attacking the g7 pawn. It's white to play here. Again, I would continue the explanation in the video, but if you want, you can pause the video and try to find out the answer yourself. However, let me show it to you now. The answer is that white will play rook takes g7. It's a check. The king cannot take the rook because it's supported by the bishop. The first move is king to h8. Now here white will continue with the discovered check. Remember, this bishop is in line with the king. So when this rook moves, it will be a discovered check. So what do you think is the best square? Well, the best square is rook takes f7 check. The rook cannot take the rook. There's no time because this check first. So the first move again is king to g8. And now this time you can play the move rook g7 check. And now the first move again is king h8. And here you can just move the rook and aim for a simple checkmate. You can move the rook all the way back to g1. It's a check. And now you will realize why rook taking that f7 pawn was so important. Otherwise, the pawn would have pushed to f6 and that would have blocked the check. That doesn't happen anymore. The king has nowhere to go. Forcefully, black has to block the check with the rook. And then bishop takes f6 is simply checkmate. So this is very important that you study very well. Let's take a look at the answer again. I'm going to pull up the answer for you. So this is what you should study. So it's rook takes g7 check, then king h8, then rook takes f7 check. It's not checked by the rook, it's checked by the bishop. Then king g8, rook g7 check, again king h8. This time you can bring the rook all the way back. The rook has to block the check, but it's hanging, and bishop takes f6 is just checkmate. So fantastic indeed, and you guys need to study this. This is known as the Morphy's way. Let's proceed. This is another very good example in the Morphy's mate, taking a good leaf out of the last position. You would know that the rook and the bishop, they play a very important part. So this is white to play again. If you want, you can pause the video and find the answer, but I'm going to continue with the solution. So the answer here with white to play is queen takes f6. It's not a check, but it's a threat for checkmate, because if black doesn't take the queen now, the next move is queen takes g7, checkmate, with the help of this bishop here. Oops, not there. With the help of this bishop. Okay, so that's why black will take the queen. G takes f6. And now the right way to continue is not bishop taking the pawn, but in fact rook g3 check. Nothing can block the check, so king h8 is forced. And now you'd remember some things that we studied in the last position. Bishop takes f6 is checkmate. The rook covers the g8 and the g7 squares. Absolutely beautiful. Seriously. Now the point is that I'll bring up the notation window again. Queen takes f6. It's a beautiful sacrifice. Black has to accept it, otherwise queen takes g7 is just checkmate. So g takes f6. Now you should first give this check by the rook. Rook g3 check. King h8 is forced, and bishop takes f6 is checkmate. This is again the Morphy's mate. Now let's move on to the next position. This is again an important position when it comes to the Morphy's checkmate. Here you have a rook sacrifice. Again, if you want to pause the video with that clue, you can start finding the answer. However, because it's the revision lecture, I'll continue my speech and I'll present the answer. So the correct way is rook takes g7 check. King takes g7, queen g5 check. Notice that the king really has nowhere to go, so the first move is king h8, and now queen f6 check. King g8 is forced. Now the queen does the role of the bishop, you remember from the last position, and so we have to bring the rook in the action now. So we play rook g1 check. The king has nowhere to go. The first move is queen g3 to block the check, and rook takes g3 is finally checkmate. So let me bring the notation and then we will study this. Rook takes g7 check. It's a nice sacrifice. King takes g7. Queen g5 check. King h8. Now don't double up the king, the queen and the rook here. There's no time for that. So you have to play with the tempo. So the right way to continue is first giving the check with the queen, okay? Queen f6 check, king g8. Now bring the rook. Now the king has nowhere to go, so has to block the check with the queen. But the queen is hanging, and take it with the rook and deliver the checkmate. So this is fantastic. We studied the Morphy's mate enough, and I think it is now time for us to move to the next checkmate pattern that you have to study from your notes, which is the Arabian mate. It's a pattern that involves the rook and the knight. In this position, it's white to play, and there is a beautiful queen sacrifice. So again, I don't mind if you want to pause the video. The correct way to checkmate black here is to sacrifice the queen, as I have mentioned earlier, and it's queen takes h7. Now the first move is king takes h7. Black has no other choice. And notice now here how beautifully knight has controlled the escaping squares for the black king. g8 and g6. Absolutely beautiful. And making use of that, white now delivers the checkmate with the move rook h1. Absolutely amazing. The knight has controlled the escape squares. The rook is giving the check, and the black king has nowhere to go. So this is beautiful. This is the Arabian mate that you have to study. Let's get back to the position, bring the notation for you. Queen takes h7 check. King takes h7 is forced, and rook h1 delivers the checkmate. Notice again that this checkmate pattern is with the rook and the knight. Let's move to the next one. This is again the Arabian mate. Let's see if you can figure it out for yourself. Now, the point is, whenever you have a position, you have to look at the forcing moves first. For example, if white does not look at the forcing option here, then it is black who will checkmate white in one move. White is careless. Notice that black is threatening queen takes c2 checkmate with the help of this rook. So if white is not very active in play, black definitely has plans of his own. So let's see what happens now. Again, it's a beautiful. So one thing is very clear: white does not want to give black any chance. So queen takes h7 check. King has to take the queen. Queen is hanging, but it's a sacrifice. And again, the same pattern where the knight's covering the escape squares. So you bring the rook over to deliver the checkmate. Notice again, I really like the way this knight controls any escaping ideas of the king, and rook delivers the checkmate. So this is just a beautiful idea. Let me bring the notation again. So it's queen takes h7 check, king takes h7, rook h1 is just checkmate. Very pretty indeed. Let us move on to the next position. Now here, this one works well again in a pattern that is quite similar. Here the idea is again to checkmate with the knight and with the rook. We have a very beautiful idea in mind. Again, a queen sacrifice at work. If you want to pause the video, you can. Let me show you. Queen takes g6 is check. Now the black pawn will take the queen. Notice if the black pawn does not take the queen here, then the next threat white has is, if the king moves to h8, then queen takes h7 is checkmate. So black pawn will take the queen, h takes g6, and now the knight will come into action. Notice how the rook has nicely cut off the king, so the king has to remain on the 8th rank. So now knight springs into action. Knight f6 check. The force move is king h8, and now rook h7 is checkmate. How beautiful is the knight position. Knight supports the rook and also stops the king from escaping to the g8 square. Very beautiful indeed. And let's bring the notation for you. So queen takes g6, h takes g6, knight f6 check, king h8, and rook h7 is checkmate. Anytime you want to pause the video, you can always pause. The thing is that you have to study, but this is a lecture, so I'm in a continuous speech, but you can always pause the video and restart. Let's move on to the next position. We are going to move now to the concept of pawn breaks. It's very important you study that. Now this is the endgame technique. So the pieces are off the board. There have been quite a few exchanges, and we arrive at the end. Arrive towards the business end, the conclusion, the climax. So here you have white with white to play and with the pawn up, and let's see how he can convert his advantage into victory. So white will try to create a pawn break. So he will play h5. Now black has two options here. Either he takes the pawn, or the other thing black could try is getting the king to action. So we are going to study both. But first let's look at what happens if black takes the pawn. White will continue the pawn march. It's a beautiful clearance. h4, g7, h3, g8 equal to queen check. Notice it's a check with the promotion of the pawn. And the next move, white could just bring the queen to g3, pick up the pawn, and go on to win the game. However, if after h5, black decides to bring the king into the game by a move like king b5, then it's very important for white to know how to continue. Notice that if black pawn takes the pawn instead of pushing to h6. If black tries to win by taking the pawn on g6, then suddenly white pawn will not promote, because king e6, g7, king f7, f8 equal to queen, but king takes, sorry, g8 equal to queen and king takes g8. So white has to be very careful here not to take the pawn, but instead just to proceed with h6. That way the black pawn will promote successfully, because black king cannot come in time. So king e6, h7, king f7, h8 equal to queen, and white should easily win after this. So it's a very important thing for all of you to study. I'm going to bring the notation pane for you, but it is better if you write it down in this pattern, because then there are variations to write. So one will cover up what happens after pawn takes pawn. The other variation, if black decides to make his king active by playing king d5, and the mistake white should avoid is, taking that pawn on g6. So you can pause the video and you can study this. Meanwhile, let me move on to the next position. Now this one is called line closing principle. Line opening, line closing is the chapter you have in level 3 that you have to study, and this one is a very beautiful position in that chapter, from that chapter. Here it is white to play, and you can pause the video if you want to find out what should be the correct way for white to continue. I'm going to reveal the answer now. The correct way for white to continue is to play bishop f7 check. Now here black has choices. Either he moves his king to h8, or he takes the bishop with the queen. So we're going to study both. Let's say first the queen takes the bishop. Queen takes f7. And now you would notice that the black queen is attacked 2 times and it's defended only once by his own king. So queen takes f7 check. King is forced in the corner, h8. And now queen sacrifice. Queen takes f8 check. Rook takes f8, and rook takes f8 delivers the checkmate. So very pretty indeed. Let me bring the position back to how it was. First move is bishop f7 check, we know that. And now let's understand what if king h8 is played. So if the king goes to h8, it is now here that you have to demonstrate your understanding of the line opening or line closing. So here you play a beautiful move, bishop e8. Notice how beautiful it is. It just cuts the connection between the rook and the bishop, unleashing a double attack of the queen and the rook on this bishop here. It is just magnificent. Bishop e8, winning on the spot. So now what happens is, after rook takes bishop, bishop is hanging, you still can continue with the same back rank checkmate threat. There's no point bringing the queen also to the aid of the bishop, because that would still mean that this bishop is attacked twice and defended only once. So white can still pretty much continue with the same plan, and it's still checkmate. So it is very important for you to study such concepts in your level clearance test and level notes, because that will help you to understand the game better. This is level 3, of course. It's a long way to go. Let me bring up the notation for you, and I again suggest that this is the way that you study it, because it will show you also the variations. I don't mind you pausing the video. You can continue the video after you've written down or jotted down the answer in a notebook. Let us now proceed to the next position. And what do we have here? In the next position, we have the concept destroying the defender. It's a very important tactical motif. Destroying the defender. Now, who is the defender here? You can clearly see from this position, it's white to play, and the knight here has been attacked 2 times, but black has successfully defended it twice as well. So the queen here is the defender and the king. So if we can destroy the defender, then the knight can become vulnerable. And so how white proceeds with this idea in mind is to play rook e8 first. Notice that the knight cannot take the rook because it is pinned, absolute pin by the queen. Remember, there are two kinds of pins, absolute pin and relative pin. So this is an example of absolute pin. Whenever a piece is pinned to the king, you say it is absolute pin. So queen takes rook, and now you have successfully removed the defender. Now the knight definitely is attacked twice and is defended only once. So now white can proceed. Queen takes f6 check. The first move is king g8. And now white is going to make a move that threatens checkmate, which is bishop h6. The threat is queen g7 checkmate. And there are two ways black can stop that g7 mate. Either by playing queen d7, but then queen f8 is checkmate, or by playing queen f7. After that is made into queen d8 check, queen f8 blocking the check, and queen f8 checkmate with the help of this bishop. So black doesn't escape, and I'll bring the notation now. It's very important that you find this first move. It's so important. Rook e8. Beautiful. So again, pause the video if you want to jot down or note the answer and make a proper study. I'll move on to the next position. So the next position is the pawn break. Remember, we already have done one pawn break position before. This is your second pawn break position. Notice that both the sides have got 3 pawns and the material is equal, of course. The only advantage, only slight advantage white has is that his pawns have advanced as far as the 5th rank while the black pawns are still at the base. See how cool chess is. The material is equal. The only slight advantage is that white has advanced to the 5th rank. And so, although the material is equal, there is something white can do. Furthermore, white's king actually is the one that's worse in position, because it's the black king that can quickly and very swiftly come to attack the pawns. The opposition actually is not good for the white king. But still, as I mentioned, the advantage white has is that his pawns have advanced to the 5th rank. So how does white achieve victory here? By using the concept of a pawn break. He should push the middle pawn, so which is the b5 pawn here, and play b6. Now black has to capture, because if black doesn't make the capture, then either way white will make the capture and will promote to queen. So definitely black has to make a capture. So the capture can be either c takes b6 or a takes b6. So let's take a look at what happens if it is c takes b6. Remember that you have to push the right pawn in order to win here. White has to know that. So if the capture has happened in this direction, it's always important to push the same pawn. Again, let's take it slowly. Look at the direction of the capture, and you have to push the pawn in the same direction, that is in the same direction. So in this case you push a6, and that's winning, because now after b takes a6, you just simply push the pawn. You don't take the black pawn. Of course, you just push the pawn to c6, and without any obstruction, now c7, c8, white will queen in 2 moves and should be able to win the game. Of course, black also has now 2 passed pawns, but notice that that's not good, because this is a check. And the next move, white should clearly be able to just gobble up the pawns and win the game. That should be a piece of cake. Let's take a look at the second scenario. Remember, the other capture is a takes b6. Just let's draw the arrows again. What did I just teach you? Important to remember the direction in which the capture happened. So it's a takes b6 this time. So definitely it's the c pawn that has got to be pushed this time. It's important to understand which pawn to push. Otherwise, it's easy to ruin the whole position from here, from winning to losing. And you don't want that to happen. So c6 push. What a beautiful push. And now, of course, after b takes c6, black has no time to make captures on the a5 or any of the forward pawns, even in the earlier variation, because then simply white will just take the 7th rank pawn and promote to the queen the next move. So it's important to remember that. So after B takes C6. Don't take the pawn. A6, push the pawn, and then A7 and A8, and white will promote to the queen and win the game. You said it. So I'll bring the notation. It's very important to study this, and it's important to write both the variations, because black could make the capture either C takes B6 or by playing A takes B6, and you should know as a white player how to achieve victory. I have no doubt that you have all enjoyed studying these positions, and let's continue with the next topic in our syllabus. Now this one is the back rank checkmate. Now this one probably is the easiest position that we have studied so far. So I have no doubts that even without pausing the video, you would just get it, and you would have got it. I have no doubt that you've got it. So this one is pretty simple. White achieves checkmate by playing rook e8 check, rook takes e8, and here I have shown two arrows just to highlight that queen should take the rook and deliver checkmate. However, white can win the queen as well, but of course you don't want to capture the queen when you can just finish the game with a checkmate. However, remember that rook was on c8 as a defender for this queen, and the rook has now moved, so queen takes c4 is also possible. However, of course you go for the checkmate, which is the red arrow, and this is known as the back rank checkmate. Notice here how the knight is nothing but a pawn here, is it not? It's so beautiful. The knight is nothing but the pawn here, as if there were three pawns on h7, g7, and f7. It's very, very beautiful. It is a piece of aesthetic brilliance. Let me bring the notation, and this is pretty easy. So rook e8 check, rook takes e8, and queen takes e8 is checkmate. You can pause the video if you want to make notes, and we will proceed. The next position that we have, now this is something very interesting. We again go back to the end game positions that you have to study, and at level 3 you have this beautiful position, which actually is from a game played between Grandmaster, former world champion India's Vishwanathan Anand, and Grandmaster Pravin Thipsay, also from India. And this one actually is interesting. It was played in 1987 in Coimbatore, and if I am not wrong, this game is available on chessgames.com or other sites where you have the chess games database. It's a very interesting game because black has promoted to queen, and looks like, normally king and queen versus king and queen is a draw, but this one is a winning position for white, as Vishy demonstrated. It is perfectly okay to pause the video and try to find out the winning move. And if you had paused the video, let me now show you the answer. You can see if you got the right continuation. It's queen b4 check. Beautiful. Queen b4 check. If you really got the answer or thought of the same move, appreciate. It's a really good work. And now here black has a couple of options: king a2 and king c2. Of course, both are losing. So let's study first king c1, mind you. King c1 and king a2 are the options. So if king c1, it's made in two. Queen d2 check, king b1 forced, and queen c2 is just checkmate. Absolutely beautiful. And the second option black had was to go to a2. So after king a2, it's not the queen move, it's the king move that's winning, king c2. Isn't it absolutely amazing? The queen is on the board, but look how helpless this black queen is against this beautifully positioned white king. The black queen cannot deliver a safe check. The black queen cannot give a check on b2, white will take and deliver checkmate. Cannot deliver a check on c1, king will take. There is nowhere where black queen can give a safe check without suffering the loss of material. So this is beautiful because there's queen on the board, but the king is so nicely placed. The black queen finds herself absolutely hopeless. There are two things now black can do. He played, I think Pravin Thipsay played queen e5. I think he designed at queen b4. The game didn't go so long because at grandmaster level, after the very first move queen b4, he realized that this is losing. I mean, both the options king a2, queen king c1, both are losing. If I'm not wrong, Pravin Thipsay resigned here. But having said that, black can try here queen e5 because that takes care of two checkmates. It stops queen a5 checkmate. It stops queen b2 checkmate by white. But still, there are too many threats, so white still has a checkmate idea, and queen a4 is checkmate. This is absolutely beautiful. I'll bring the notation for you. You can study that because there are variations with the king going to a2 or king choosing to go to c1. You should study both. And I will again say that it's available, the full game. I think this started as a Spanish game. It's Rui Lopez game. So you can check that out on chessgames.com. 1987 was played in Coimbatore. Alright, so we will go on to the next position that you have to study. The next position, this is also a checkmate study related to destroying the defender, if I'm not wrong. And this one is from Nigel Short versus Benjamin. I can't quite remember the first name of the black player, pardon me for that. But I think it's Nigel Short playing white pieces here, and Benjamin is the player playing black pieces. Can't quite remember the year as well. Here, white has a winning idea. Knight takes e5, black pawn takes the knight, so d takes e5. And now, do you notice the winning move? It's easy to see actually. Bishop a3 is a check. And rook blocks it, rook d6. However, if you're wondering why rook d6, I mean rook e7 can also block the check, right? But if black blocks the check that way, black is only stopping the king from escaping because now queen h8 is just checkmate. It's just beautiful. Friendly piece, becomes a very friendly piece for the queen. So that's why I said that after bishop a3, rook d6 is the way to block the check. And bishop takes d6, check. Queen can take, but now that's why I said it's destroying the defender. The queen was necessary on c7 for the protection of this f7 pawn, which is attacked twice by the king and this this rook here. So it's very important that queen was there. But now after queen takes d6, queen takes f7 is just checkmate. Really remarkable. I'll bring the notation here. So important to study what happens if rook e7 blocks the check. I think that was a very nice thing to study. The rook d6 blocks the check. So the first move is knight takes e5, d takes e5, bishop a3 check. The king cannot move anywhere. Rook d6. You all know what happens with rook e7, right? Bishop takes, queen takes. So queen has now left the 7th rank. And now, as a matter of fact, rook takes f7 is also checkmate here. You can checkmate with rook taking this f7 pawn as well instead of queen takes f7. All right, so let me just get back to the position, and that is it for level 3. So I have no doubt that you've enjoyed all the positions. Make a thorough study of it. If you are ready with these positions, I can safely say that you know pretty well about the level 3, and you should confront the level 3 clearance test at the Vaidya Chess Hub pretty confidently. So keep learning, keep playing chess, as I always say. Up until next time, bye bye.